Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back after lunch. May I request you to please be seated. Once again, a polite reminder to all of you to please keep your mobile phones on silent. We're going to be starting with our next session, taking Indian companies global. But at the same time, ladies and gentlemen, I would also like to inform all of you parallel session in the Regal Room, which is a virtual session, and it's also available for viewing. However, many of you would also have the virtual session link with you. In conversation session on future of the global economy and India's place, virtual and viewing is also at Regal Room, which is, ladies and gentlemen, taking place on the first floor. I'm going to request you to please come and take seats now here in the Crystal Ballroom for a session on taking Indian companies global. May I invite you to please be seated, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be starting shortly. So as I was saying, we also have a parallel session, ladies and gentlemen, which is an in-conversation session, but a virtual one on future of the global economy and India's place. In conversation, we have Mr. Borge Brende, President, World Economic Forum, with Dr. Naushad Forbes, past President, CI and Co-Chairman, Forbes Marshall Private Limited. That's taking place at the Regal Room on the first floor. Here in the Crystal Ballroom, we have a session on taking Indian companies global. So I'm going to request you to please now take seats and then we will begin. May I invite you to be seated, please, ladies and gentlemen. We have about 2 to 3 minutes to go before we can start sharp at 2 p.m. I invite you to please be seated, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. Yes. Are they here now? Are they here now? Yes. So should we start at 2 p.m. sharp or now? Ladies and gentlemen, just about 2 minutes to go for this next session in the Crystal Room for taking Indian companies global. I welcome you back after that lunch break. May I request you to please be seated, ladies and gentlemen? We're going to be starting very shortly. The speakers are with us at the venue and they're going to be joining us in the room very, very shortly. May I request you to please be seated? Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, a very warm welcome to all of you. May I request you to please settle in. Ladies and gentlemen, India's influence in the global arena is increasing. India has much to contribute to the global economy and the global dialogue on many significant issues. Indian industry has much to contribute to India's growing global stature, expanding its global presence as well as global footprint. In our next session on taking Indian companies global, let us now understand the way forward from the eminent speakers, the experts. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Baba Kalyani, Chairman and Managing Director, Bharat Forge Limited. Let's welcome him back on stage. Welcome, sir. Mr. Sunil Duggal, Whole-Time Director, Group Safety Officer and Group CEO, Vedanta Limited. Let's welcome him on stage with a big round of applause. Namaskar and welcome, sir. Mr. Ritesh Agarwal, Founder and Group CEO, OYO. Let's welcome him on stage, ladies and gentlemen. He's going to be joining us shortly. He's with us at the venue. May I invite Mr. Sujoy Chaudhary, Director, Planning and Business Development, Indian Oil Corporation Limited. A big round of applause as we welcome him. And this session, ladies and gentlemen, will be moderated by Dr. Janmejaya Sinha, Chairman, India, the Boston Consulting Group. Mr. Ritesh Agarwal, Founder and Group CEO, OYO, is going to be joining us in a couple of minutes. Thank you once again, esteemed dignitaries, for joining us on the dais. And I'm going to now request our moderator of the session to please take over, Dr. Janmejaya Sinha. Sir.
So it's a real pleasure to be here on a topic of such importance. And we could not have had a better person to start us off than Baba Kalyani. Long before the concept of going global in India had become real. Baba had started to do that. And I remember about 10 or 15 years ago, Baba, I was asking you what drove you to it. And you had said something which was fascinating. He said, I never want to make anything which is not the best in the world. So if I make something which is best in the world, I can go with it anywhere. And I thought that was a very simply put statement, which actually all of us should aspire for. Whatever we make should be the best in the world. So Baba, could I ask you to just spend a few minutes giving us a little bit of your journey and how you have thought about going global, taking Bharat Forge global?
Thank you, Janmay. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here along with my fellow panelists, Mr. Sunil Dugal and Mr. Sujoy Chaudhary. Ritesh is not here yet. But, this whole concept of going global has multiple components to it. And the multiple components of that, especially in the manufacturing sector, because I belong to the manufacturing sector, is different for the services sector, is different for other sectors. But if you look at the manufacturing sector and you are trying to, an Indian company serving the Indian market, now wanting to serve, let's say in the automotive supply base, the German industry, which considers itself as the best in the world and nobody's better than them, or the American industry, or the Japanese industry. It is no easy task. And the three components that at least we have encountered in our journey of going global, one was the size and scale of your operation. Unfortunately, when we decided to go global, that was in the year 1999, 2000. That was our first baby step that we took. We were a small company, but as Janmay said, we had aspirations and ambitions to be amongst the top 3 or 4 in the world in our business. And we believed that we had the talent and the capability to do it. So the first criteria for any company wanting to go global is that you have to own the technology and you have to have a talent pool. It is impossible for a company who has a collaboration with somebody to go global. Your collaborator just won't allow you to do it because you're going to start eating into his market, as simple as that. So this is the first requirement. The second requirement is that in your own country, you have to be in a fairly dominant position in terms of market share. And the reason for that is if you will only get dominant and market share if you are really producing high quality products. Automotive supply industry is a very, very difficult, tough, competitive, highly quality conscious industry. They don't even tolerate a single mistake. You supply a component to a car company like Daimler and something happens on their assembly line where somebody finds a fault in your component, you are going to be immediately hauled up for a recall. And that can be very, very expensive. So you have to be able to be sure about yourself that your capabilities, your manufacturing processes, all those things are such that the product will conform to what happens outside. Now here, Indian companies have a disadvantage. And the biggest disadvantage, at least when we started, that was 30 years ago, the size and scale of India's manufacturing was pretty small. It's a different story today. Our size and scale of manufacturing is much larger. But you imagine 1990, what was the GDP of manufacturing? What was the automobile production? And as a supplier, what would be our production? So this is the second problem that you have to face. The third issue comes, and that is something not much in our own hands. The third issue is, how do you build trust and confidence with your customers? Now, a lot of this has to do with where you come from. Now, if you come from a Japanese environment, a Japanese company, you have it's like the credit rating of the country. You have a credit rating of your country on quality and performance, which is far higher. You come from India and say that you want to start supplying very critical components into a combustion engine. The first thing is they probably won't even take you inside their office. I'm talking about 1990, not today. But I think Indian industry has worked very hard in the last 20 odd years to develop this trust and capability and create brand India as a name in this sector. So these are some of the major criteria of going global. And what is the definition of going global? Going global means whichever markets you serve, whatever products you make, you have to have a reasonably high market share in those products. And reasonably high market share in the consumer business, it is normally expected that anything below 10% market share, you don't exist. Anything more than 10%, you have a chance. At 15 to 20%, you are in the market. Similarly, in our business, anything below 25% market share, you don't exist, because in the automotive supply chain, there are not more than 2 or 3 suppliers for a product. So if you have 2 or 3 suppliers for a product, you either have to have a 40% market share, then you are at least amongst the top 2, or you have to have greater than 50% market share, then you are number 1 in that business. So this is the name of the game. And once you get there, then then the travel is pretty easy. Your plane has taken off and you're cruising, and you can keep growing your business, you can keep growing your markets, and lots of things that you can do to horizontally expand. And that's what we have done. We have in our business, for the automotive industry, we have close to 60% market share in supplying engine components in the United States and in Europe. And therefore, we have a pretty dominant position with almost every customer in this space. I'll come to another aspect of going global, and this is more recent. And that aspect is that you now see Government of India, especially Ministry of External Affairs and other ministries, driven of course by our Prime Minister's vision of keeping India first in everything that they do, politically or political, commercial, geopolitics. We are now taking a position that what is in the best interest of India should be what needs to be done. And a good example of this is every embassy, Indian embassy in the world today, is ready to help any private sector company to get access to those markets, which you probably don't even know exist. I mean, there are, for example, in our case, we didn't even know there are markets in little countries in Africa. And our definition of Africa is Nigeria and South Africa. There are at least 20 other countries in Africa that we didn't even know that exist, which have a market for many of the products we sell. Similarly, in Eastern Europe, in the Asiatic part of Europe, there are countries which have a tremendous amount of market, which we didn't even know exist. And these markets to us were accessed by our embassies and their staff there. So I think we have to be thankful for the policy side of this equation, because getting an access to these small countries and these markets is a very different cup of tea than going to Germany or going to France or going to Sweden or going to the United States. It's very, very different. So I think there is a lot of work that is going on at the government level, getting access. And I'll just give you one example. Apart from our automotive business, we also do a lot of work in our defense business, producing products for our Indian armed forces and our services. And just recently, with the help of our embassy in one of the countries, I can't name it, we got a very large order, close to $200 million for a complete artillery gun. I mean, you can't imagine that Indian private sector company can develop and supply artillery guns to a country in Europe. So that's the name of the game. So going global is possible, takes a lot of hard work. And as the Indian economy grows, and as we heard in the morning, we are looking at an economy by 2030 to be anywhere between $7-8 trillion. That's almost the third largest economy in the world. The size of the industry will grow, and therefore the size of capability will grow. And our ability to take this capability global will also grow. Thank you.
Baba, let me ask you a few questions. I was making notes when you were speaking because some of the things were really, really very insightful. So when you said to start with, you need to own the technology. You need to have a dominant domestic market share. You need to have very high quality because small mistakes can be very costly. And that you need to build trust and confidence with the customer. So the question I'm going to ask you is, if you look at different types of markets, developed markets in Europe, emerging economies in Africa, other Eastern markets what are the differences? What is more important and less important? Where is regulation important? Where is quality important? Where is technology important? Where is relationship important? How would you if you were to give advice to somebody who is a new CEO and you are trying to get them to go to the market, what will you tell them to watch out for?
First of all, I don't think my advice to all the CEOs here are all business people. Never differentiate your product for different markets. This was the biggest mistake Indian manufacturers ever did right in the beginning. If you look at pre-1990 data of India's automobile component exports, 80% of that component exports went to the Middle East and Africa as spare parts. Okay, most of them spurious spare parts. If you look at the data today, 95% of the automobile component export, and which is quite large in terms of value terms, I don't know the exact number, it's in billions of dollars, is all OEM components that go directly to OEMs. So that's a big difference. And when you do that, what the industry has learned in this transition from the 90s to now or even 10, 15 years ago, is to stop differentiating between what quality of products you supply to the domestic market versus what quality of products you supply to an outside market. Where you can't have two organizations within one organization. And that's a mistake we made in the early days of our manufacturing. I mean, every company did that, and I don't think it worked. The second point is that in terms of relationships, the more mature market, they don't work on relationships. The relationship comes afterwards. They first work on your capability, your ability, your technology, your talent, and then the relationship comes afterwards. In a developing market, the relationship comes first, and then the product comes afterwards. So that's the only difference that happens. But in every market, there is a time when relationships become important for any business to keep moving forward. And we have had customers for 30 years, 40 years. We keep having these functions of supplying the 1 millionth part and the 5 millionth part and all that. So, these are important things.
And the last question I'm going to ask you is, when you are choosing talent for the domestic market versus those you are choosing to represent you in the international market, is it the same talent or do you differentiate and look for different skills?
We have the same talent. Actually, we are the same guys who do the job.
Okay, that's great. Sunil, I'm going to come to you with regard to Vedanta. I am very partial to Vedanta because the promoter is from my town in Bihar. And Biharis are very good in politics, very good in bureaucracy, very good in academics, but are very rarely entrepreneurs. So he and Alkem, the Sampada Singh, are the two entrepreneurs we have actually produced from Bihar. So we are all very partial to him from Bihar. So the question that I will ask you is, why did Vedanta want to relocate to London and list there?
So there was a time, actually, it was a need of the hour at that time when we needed capital. I mean, to raise the capital in India at that point of time, if you want to go to the scale and you raise the capital, that was the requirement. And that is why our chairman moved to London at that point of time. And he raised $20 billion. And this is the FDI he brought into India and the kind of scale and size of the location which we were to put up. One of our location has costed us $10 billion at that point of time, single location. So that would not have been possible, but neither there was a mindset to finance this size of the project at that point of time. So that was the actual requirement at that point of time. It may not be so relevant today, but it was so relevant at that point of time.
Well, that, it's a fascinating point you are raising, that an Indian business, to get capital even for India, mostly for India, you went listed abroad, raised the capital, and then came to India. It's inverting this, going global on its head, but it's fascinating because capital is so important. Have you felt that you have used that capital well in India? And what are the problems you have faced with that?
I think that was the need of the hour. I mean, of course, now at this point of time, when we have to deleverage at the parent level, we have our own challenges. So the need of the hour at that point of time to bring the capital and put the size and scale of the locations and the infrastructure we wanted to put up in India, we were successful. But now at this point of time, the reverse trouble is that when you have to deleverage and what are the regulations and what is the leakage which will take place at various levels and how would you be deleveraging this? So the different theories and different concepts at different point of time are relevant. I think raising the capital by listing ourselves at London Stock Exchange at that point of time actually helped us to come to this scale. Otherwise, it would not have been possible to rise to this scale for us.
And, when you have been operating right now, you have actually, a couple of the businesses that you yourself have actually turned around completely for the group. What targets do you take for yourself? Do you want to be global best in class? How do you run your company in terms of how do you set quality targets for yourself?
One is we are a metal and mining company, and our challenges could be different, our requirements could be different from others. But if I would traverse my own life journey from my early days, and I worked in Ambuja Cement, and subsequently it was taken over by Holcim, and it became suddenly a multinational company. The question was, for the employees like us to adjust into the new environment and see that how that global environment works. But how did it help us? I gave the example that we used to have the plant managers workshop in Zurich or in the other parts of the world, where one of the locations we used to have a global plant manager workshop where hundreds of the managers are assembling like this for a week and deliberating. And then there are only very few who are from India. And then they rub shoulders and sit on the table with different sets of the people. And it brings and changes the thought process and thinking that what is the best in the world? How do people operate differently? What are their ESG practices? What are their safety practices? How do they take care of their environment? What do they do differently? What are the efficiency parameters? What is the technology they use? What is the digitization they use? What is the manpower productivity they have? So you start benchmarking. Your own mindset becomes global, and your thinking from the local thinking to the global thinking goes. I also remember at that point of time when we became a global company, although I had gone to the few management colleges in India, I never had the opportunity to go to the management colleges globally. I remember one of the first course when I was sent to IMD Lausanne, Switzerland, and I was the only Indian in that course, senior management course, and you have no option but to sit with the other colleagues of the world from the different geographies. And then you have the compulsion to learn. So this is the advantage when you go global and when you rub the shoulders with different people from the different geographies. So it also not only teaches you the benchmarking, but it also teaches you to how to adjust yourself in the different environments. As far as Vedanta is concerned, I have run Hindustan Zinc for 10 years. And when I joined Hindustan Zinc from Holcim, the challenge was that the open pit, there was a mega open pit, 2 kilometer by 2.5 kilometer, 500 meter deep open cast mine. And we were one of the largest, not the largest zinc producer in the world. And that open pit was depleting and we were to go underground. There is no underground mining culture in the country. Hardly anybody mines at the depth of 1 kilometer, 1.5 kilometer. The question was whether we'll be able to do it or not. The only way to do that was to look at what the world is doing. And fortunately, we had, the Vedanta had a couple of operations, one in Ireland, one in South Africa and Namibia, where we were operating our zinc mines there. So one was that how to look at how they are operating and how they are behaving, what are the challenges they have, what is the skill level they have. So in India, you have no technology, you have no skill, you don't know the competence, you have no managers, you have no mine designers who do the job for you. The only way to do that was to look at how the globe behaves. So we visited some of the best mines across the world. Myself went along with my team. So cut the story short, we brought even the operators from the different geographies of the world and camped them in different mines in Hindustan Zinc. We also brought a lot of planners, mines, manager, technology. We partnered with the global majors like Normet, Sandvik, Caterpillar, Epiroc, and many others. And we made those excellence centers in our own mind. We also brought the partners from Australia, like Barminco or other partners. And then their rates were 10 times higher than our rates. But to we established more like them in India, more like a center of excellence where the other people would go and visit and see that how the global operations are done. And the result was that we could successfully transition to the underground mining, 100% transition to underground. We grew in size from the time we disinvested to till now to almost 5 to 6 times. Transition to underground, increase the size to 2 to 3 times, 6 to 7 times. And now Hindustan Zinc today is the largest zinc miner in the world. And we are the 5th largest silver producer in the world. So we could do it because that global thinking was there.
That's great. I love the fact that, going global also means getting the best global talent to actually raise your standards to the best global levels. Ritesh, are you planning to go global?
First off, I'm really, really sorry about the delay. I'm coming from Sona Road. I don't know if I will complain about the traffic because I'm happy that business activity and is back in full flow. People are traveling between cities. But I think, first off, I'll give a short update. I run a company called Oyo. We started in India with over 10,000 hotels who use our brand, our technology, and tens of millions of customers. But today, close to half of our revenues come from overseas. So we are large players in Southeast Asia. We are the leading economy brand in Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and Southeast Asian region. We have a large business in Europe. That's where I was at Denmark with Mr. Kalyani a few months back. We are a fairly large business there, invested a couple of $100 million and various other parts of the world. So really the way we built our business is we built software for small hotel and holiday homeowners here in India. And now that's being used by over 100,000 business owners and over 50 million customers overseas. And I think that works very well to the context where I would like to share that whenever we talk about export opportunities, we are predominantly talking about manufacturing, which is of course a great opportunity. Or second, in services, we talk about IT services, which is a big enabler of India's new employment. But I think there is a new ecosystem that is very nascent but growing, which is the software as a service ecosystem, which is the kind of world that I represent. But I think there are many other companies in India which are growing very quickly. For a long time, that ecosystem was predominantly enabled by United States Bay Area-based companies, or maybe companies in Europe as well, SAP and various other companies that you would have heard about. But increasingly, you see India not just being, showing up in that map, but India as being probably the most exciting player, because India has this large group of engineers, the highest software engineers in the world, where every parent wants their children to grow up and become an engineer, including what my mom wanted me to become, enabling this talent, which can potentially become the next generation of not just software services, but product enablers that can get created, where entrepreneurs are also thinking. A large number of startups that you see are also creating companies in this SaaS ecosystem. So I'm very excited about it. We are also in our own humble way driving substantial exports, but not of products, but as in physical products, but of software products, which are being used in different parts around the world.
So what were the biggest challenges you faced in establishing yourself in Southeast Asia and then in Europe? And were there differences between Southeast Asia and Europe?
Yeah, I think I would say that, if I were to look at around the world, every country came with its own challenges. But I think Asia, by and large, had similar challenges as that of India, or learnings as that of India. And being English language speakers allowed us to solve for a lot of English speaking countries like United Kingdom, US, and so on. So I think these were two things that were similar. I think there are 2 or 3 things that I felt were challenges and could be great solutions for the future. I think first and foremost is appreciating what are the problems that are faced by customers for which products can be created is unknown. Until you go and meet clients, you don't know what is the requirement. And whatever we know is basically dependent on other companies in the same field. So for example, before we went overseas, we tried calling a few other companies who make hotel and holiday home software based out of India for overseas. Jo unse samajh mein aaya, we started building that. When we went to these geographies, we realized that the unique problems they face is unique to each market, unique to each segment of merchants, and the opportunities that exist is probably 50x more than what we had heard initially. So I think in any way, if whether trade promotion agencies or by any format, if specific opportunities in the software ecosystem can be set, saying that here is the 20 areas where market is available for whatever 50, 100, 200 billion dollars. I think this can enthuse a lot of entrepreneurs and startups who don't have the wherewithal and access. We had to build business for 4 years in India. Usse thode, capital came that allowed us to then travel, meet all these clients and understand what is the requirement in the first place. If we knew it earlier, we could have probably built it earlier and created more value. So that's one. Second is, I'm sure everyone else is stalwart in this. We are very early in the last 4-5 years doing overseas business, but I think, transfer pricing is a unique challenge that, we have started learning. But transfer pricing in the world of software product becomes even more unique, because there is absolutely no way to understand what is the fair price of that software, because it is the first time we have created it. There is no other product like that exists. It's an innovation, which for the first time client is buying, and we only set the price, and every week we change the price depending on what is selling, not selling, right? So how do you identify the fair price of that software, and how do you get a third-party valuer to, like, the third-party valuer like is also trying to figure out how that software works. So I think that's one thing that we are learning. I think the world has become a much easier place today, I'm told, from what it was earlier. And I think that that's an area that we can further continue to improve on. I think the last but not the least, I would say is, we've been very excited. We took advantage of the service-linked incentive scheme that was there a couple of years back. I think that, similar to a PLI, having something like an SLI, which inspires specifically not the broader services, but specifically this new age ecosystem of markets where India is not getting enough share of, but probably Europe and US are, opportunity of exporting software products rather than software services only, I think could be an additional opportunity. But I think, I feel India has unique opportunity to dominate the SaaS, ecosystem because of English language speaking, software engineers that exist here, and also our ability to be very, flexible by understanding what kind of consumer ecosystems exist and how can we make a solution.
So
But,
with
that's
your
sort of the
talent,
learning.
what did you do about talent in Southeast Asia and in Europe? Did you hire locally? What were the cultural challenges? How was it? How easy was it to integrate?
I think first off, India is again very unique in the world of software, because if you look at world's best digital companies, their CEOs are now from Indian origin. And almost every boardroom is having a discussion that whenever they're looking at succession, some of our board members are on various other US boards, and they say nowadays in boards there is a discussion saying that why are we not nominating an Indian origin person as the next successor? Are we doing something wrong which all these other companies are doing right? So I think it's a rapid shift. So we are very lucky that we are in an ecosystem where finding talent of Indian origin is actually relatively easier, either from India or Indians who are abroad, who we can get access to. And they also have heard about OYO. So, when we were going to recruit in Germany, there was somebody who knew about OYO from their friends, family, somebody in the family had used us. So they reached out to us themselves saying, I heard that OYO is coming to Germany. I'd like to come join you. So I think we've gotten a lot of Indian origin people in overseas as an enabler. But on the field sales, for people who go and engage eventually with the direct client, not the leadership, we have recruited locally, where we've either, of course, recruited from people in the industry, or we've recruited people from other technology companies such as Amazon, Uber, Airbnb, etc., which are other digital companies where people have reasonable experience. But I think we have seen Indians overseas as being a very, very critical enabler of our growth, because they have in some way, a sense of pride, saying now we will have an Indian consumer brand. In the 20th town, like in Bremen in Germany, you will see an Indian consumer brand that people will go and use. So that sense of pride inspires them to, overcome a lot of challenges that would otherwise come by.
So Sujay, I'm trying to decide how nice to be to you or not. Where should I begin with Indian Oil? So 3 questions for you. You all have joint ventures, in different parts of the world. As you have been thinking of, you are operating in an area which is the most important for us in our balance of trade discussions, right? I mean, it's one of the most important things that we need to fix. And the more you can find inside, you actually give us much greater Atmanirbharta than most other things. So the question that I have for you is, as you have been exploring these joint ventures in different parts, what have been the constraints you have faced, in actually going global through a partnership route? And how many of them have been internal to you and how many of them have been external to you?
Thank you, Janmay. And my co-panelist, is wonderful to be on this platform. Yes, per se, Indian Oil was created with the concept of promoting Atmanirbharta. We started our journey in 64 when the government felt that we need to have a national oil company. Especially, I would like to highlight the year, the 70s, the first oil shock, when our R&D was created. The moot purpose of creating the R&D then was that we create a company who actually translates these lubes. As I speak, all the automotive majors, including I'm sure Babaji's company also runs a little bit on servo, which is our premier brand.
Do you?
In fact, right at this moment, Tata Motors and we are working at Israel to promote that battery swapping technology with Finergy. So we are there everywhere. Now, though, as I say, the moot point was creating or trying to substitute products. And we have been, to a very large extent, successful. Today, Navy operates almost 100% on our products. By our products, we mean the advanced lubricants which are needed, which were erstwhile completely imported in the country from countries like Europe. Now, if I look at the T90 tanks, which are a recent thing, there also we have been able to substitute the imported lubes completely. Today, you look at the territory of Ladakh. The typical incidence was every summer they used to use a lube, which was of course available in the country, and the winter they used to shift to an European lube because one of the multinational majors, Shell, etc., who used to supply these lubes. We have been able to completely substitute that grade and introduce only one grade, which works from -50 to +50. So that has been an incredible journey which we have been able to do. Come to petrochemicals. When we started petrochemicals, which is a lesser known product of ours, and in fact, I was talking to Baba Kalyani just a few minutes back. So this polymer was a recent venture of ours. When we started, we were in a nascent stage and we had a few grades, especially in the automotive sector, which is one of the premium sectors where we use our impact copolymers, which gives you the strength as well as the flexibility. We have been able to introduce about 20 grades. Now, with that, what has happened is to a large percent of our automotive customers, we have been able to reach our grades. So what was the special which actually led us to this journey? So what was special is we have been able to benchmark these grades with the multinational grades. All the imported polymers that we are there, we have been able to substitute them and with the Indian grades and especially Indian oil grades. So that is how we transcended this journey. Now coming to the joint ventures, which is a specific point which you asked me, I would like to tell you that we today operate at quite a few countries, namely the neighboring countries, of course, Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, then Middle East based out of Dubai. Then we have our offices in US, in Canada, in Russia. So all these countries. Now, originally, the concept was more of supplying lubricants as well as fuel products. But subsequently, we started going on exploration. Many of the people in this house may not know that we are the second largest producer of oil. Because normally our name does not come with exploration company. We are the second largest. We, in fact, are double the quantum of oil that Oil India produces. And most of it comes from overseas. Now, if that is happening, that basically tantamounts to the fact that we are saving foreign exchange because we are earning in dollars abroad and we operate at geographies like Russia, where we have two major fields. We operate in Canada, we operate in US, we operate in UAE in a major way. And we have fields in Venezuela, in Iran, which unfortunately we are not able to harness at this point of time due to the geopolitics. So that is how the spread is. And every area we had unique experiences. We had to adjust, adapt, and that is how we have come. Now, if I look at joint ventures separately, today we are moving in every direction with a joint venture. Because if I look at Petchem, you cannot do without a joint venture today, because your technology partner would only like to give you those specialty petrochemicals only if you allow them to come into a joint venture. Similarly, we are moving into textiles, we are moving into other advanced lubricants. Like I'll give you an example. We are about to declare the production of SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel, which would become mandatory from 2025 for all international airlines. Today, principally 3 countries manufacture: Sweden, Norway, and US. So we would be the 4th country to manufacture, and we would go for 2 joint ventures, one with a US company, both are US companies. So that is how we have to move forward, because tomorrow's era is all about collaboration, be it domestic collaboration or be it internal collaboration. And in all these areas, depending on the partner, depending on their strength, depending on my strength, we need to adapt, we need to modify, we need to change the approach to make it successful. Otherwise, these won't last.
So, which has been the hardest country for you to operate in, and which has been the easiest country for you to operate in?
There are a few ifs and buts. Why I would say this, look at Russia today. As you know, the geopolitics has played its game. So what has happened, these oil majors who were the operators there and with whom we used to enjoy a fantastic relation, those relations have been disturbed for the time being. So that has created definitely a few ripples. The outputs have reduced. But otherwise, I would say Canada was an area where we entered into a exploration business for gas as well as oil, which is called the Pacific Northwest project of Canada, which was on the western coast of Canada, where we were supposed to get a huge quantum of gas as well as oil. The main portion was gas. We have not been able to monetize the gas. The gas is there, it is sitting there, but we have not been able to monetize because Canada typically has an issue of First Nation. The First Nation citizens actually blocked that pipeline, which would have led this gas to the west coast and where from we could have liquefied this gas and transported it. So that was an issue. That is one of the major obstacles that we had faced in this journey. And otherwise, UAE has been very friendly. UAE is very, very supportive of whatever developments we do. They have, in fact, left their back-in rights in certain major wells where we have discovered oil. So UAE was very, very friendly to that extent. Otherwise, generally, people have been very cooperative. Even in Israel, which is considered to a not so easy a place to operate, we have got fantastic cooperation and we're doing extremely well.
Do you have to also employ overseas personnel in
Yes, yes.
your...
In all these ventures, other than a few critical people, we have overseas employees. Mauritius, we also have a major holding. When we started, Mauritius was a very important, interesting case in point. I was a person who wrote the initial, I should say, the notes to establish that company. And no one ever thought that an Indian company going into Mauritius, where all the oil majors were operating, would have a market share anything beyond 5-6%. Our market share in Mauritius went up to 60%. So you can imagine the kind of influence which we had there. Today, it is slightly less because the part of the aviation fuel has gone to another oil major, but still we enjoy a 40+ market share even in Mauritius. In Lanka, even in these troubled times, you have seen the Lanka oil, IOC Lanka has done extremely well and the highest ever profits. We have been very supportive of the government of Sri Lanka as well. And we had to do all this, changing our ways of doing things. So we are not a typical PSU. We do things differently. And we are very firm on our...
You make the government behave.
Government is there, so but government definitely acts as an enabler. But at the same time, we need to respond in a particular time frame so that we can make it happen.
And now I'm going to come to the audience to get questions. You'll just find that this panel is fascinating. You have people from oil, mining and minerals, you have manufacturing, and you have the new age player who has come up and in a short period gone global in a manner that you've just heard. So would you raise your hand, identify yourself And please ask brief questions. Thank you. Yes, gentlemen there. You could speak up. We might be able to hear you. No, we can't hear. We need a mic there. Yeah.
I'm Pradeep from Danatom International, Switzerland. We are working on a space of SAF. So the question is your refinery is now producing SAF or you have tied up as of now? First question.
We are not producing SAF as of now. We are going ahead to produce SAF. We are
you're
tying up with the licenses to produce SAF.
So are you considering any European hydrogen Europe technology into it, or you're only working towards US?
As of now, the planned ones are US based.
US based. Okay. You're not looking at Halde topside technology, which is quite.
It's there in the radar. We are evaluating Halda Topso as well. There's no two opinion about that because Halda Topso happens to be a part and parcel of Indian refining sector. So there's no two idea because what has happened in one case, I'll give you a name, though it is not approved as yet, but still. As you know, LanzaTech is one of our, we have invested into LanzaTech. Now, LanzaTech is a double decarbonization measure that we are taking. First of all, we are collecting the flue gases from one of our major units in the Panipat refinery, and we are converting that to a third generation ethanol. Now, from third generation ethanol, we intend to move towards SAF. So if that is so that is why we are continuing with LanzaTech in that particular project.
Are you considering green hydrogen as a way forward?
Yes, green hydrogen, as you know, the whole idea of Indian oil today is we occupy around 9% of the India's energy pie. I'm talking of energy pie, not oil pie. So if 9% of energy pie today I occupy, my tomorrow's vision also is to be occupying 9% of the total energy pie of tomorrow. And in that energy pie, the nature of fuel will completely change from today, what is there, to tomorrow's. So tomorrow's fuel, I need to be there. And green hydrogen is definitely one where we would be there. You must have seen that we have announced a joint venture with L&T and Renew to that effect. So that is one way, definitely, but we are exploring multiple ways.
I'll get in touch with you a little later on
Definitely.
many more things, Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Very good afternoon to everyone. I'm Dr. Nancy. I'm the CEO of MentorX Global. While we are, focusing upon my company, focus upon the skill development for the startup, and seeing all of you, from next generation entrepreneur to all these successful veterans here, I would just love to ask you that, we talk about unicorns, we talk about startups, and we talk about all the glorious people who are here. But there are many failures also that doesn't get talked about, and definitely many of the startups are there. So I wish to know from you, from successful people, and definitely Ritesh can also contribute, that what were the red flags in your journey when you started looking for investors? I mean, the hindrance.
Yeah, I think given the discussion today is about economic policy, global economic policy, I'll try and use that context in terms of failures. Look, I think when we tried taking our product global, initially we first launched in Malaysia, which was in Southeast Asia. So that was fair successful. We've done well there over the years. But I think there are some countries we've not done well. So for example, China is one of those regions where we did try and pursue business. It's a huge market. The allure of China, for some reason, it convinces a lot of technology companies to go there with not much success eventually. And we learned it the hard way ourselves. Of course, we still have operations there, but I think the big learning from there has been, first off, you have to try, and probably a lot of times you'll be successful, a few times you'll fail, and you have to take it on your stride, learn from it, and get better next day. That's the big learning. The second one is, I think it's critical to try and prioritize markets where you have reasonable visibility of high success rather than just markets which are big. I think China as a market was big, but I think there were also second order other implications which are outside of just consumer proposition that we should have thought about. I think the third is investors. I think at the end of the day, clearly rejections is a name of the game. Your clients may reject you sometime. Your future team members may consider, some of them may not want to join you. You may have shareholders who may not want to purchase your paper at that point of time. I think at the end of the day, it's your job to continue to make sure that you do a better job, you create better earnings, you create better services for your customers, and eventually I've seen that, they turn around. So I think, that's sort of been our learning. Yes.
Great.
Wonderful. Thank you.
You, sir?
Good noon, sir. This is Abhishek Bhatt, Vice President Consortia. So I've been researching the mining domain for quite some time, and I understand a lot of changes. The act has been changed quite a lot, and a lot of rules and regulations are also being changed. In the area of exploration and survey, around 17 or 18 NEAs have been impaneled. So how do you see this will impact the mining industry downstream?
Entire world is looking at whether we'll be able to transition because of the mineral scarcity or not. So there are minerals which are very critical in nature. There are rare earth minerals. India, the ecosystem is such that you are not able to explore beyond certain depth. We think the minerals are the massive minerals, like limestone, like iron ore, like bauxite, like coal. So we do not think that there are minerals beyond that, but the real requirement of mineral is beyond that. If you need battery, if you need the other applications, storage, if you have to put up your renewable power. So all this transition will really need critical minerals, and actually the requirement of the minerals beyond these 4 or 5 minerals will be very, very large. If I would give you the example that a traditional gas-based power plant, 1 megawatt, compared to 1 megawatt traditional gas-based power plant, the renewable power requires around 6 to 7 times more minerals. Similarly, EV requires 8 to 10 times more minerals in terms of value compared to a traditional car. So the entire world is looking. So the ecosystem, that ecosystem is not there. The exploration, the government has been thinking that this is their duty to do the exploration. So if we were to benchmark globally how the exploration is done globally, the exploration again is done by the startups. So there are junior exploration companies who would actually list on the stock exchanges, and they get the handsome capital. The exploration is a business where the risk could be 1:100. There is a mine called Century Mine in the world. This is called Century Mine because the exploration went on for 100 years. 100 years there was a failure. 100th year they found the success, and it became the biggest mine in the world. So the question is that in India, whether the people, the startup people or the young guys know that there is a requirement of exploration, and whether the government encourages that, and the regulation in India, which we are trying to tell the government that there is a need to benchmark where you will have to sell it to the startups and tell them that you can raise the capital, you can risk the capital, and there could be a smooth transition from the exploration to the mining where they can sell their right. If the risk is 100 times, the reward could be 1,000 times. Then only the people will be encouraged.
The last question. No.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Kunal. I'm from GAIL, Gas Authority, and part of marketing team. So my question is predominantly for the oil sector. Like Indian Oil has the largest customer base, and obviously in terms of volume and revenue as well. And in terms of point of sales as well, the kind of presence Indian Oil has over the pan India is immense. So as government focusing on more on EV and hydrogen based fuels, so how do you plan and how do you strategize in terms of the large retail base, what you have in building up, going along with the government strategy scheme for the EVs and the hydrogen?
Yeah. As you rightly said, these are called retail outlets, right? So in the first thing, today we dispense fuel, petrol, diesel, lubricants to these outlets. We are also the second largest gas player. So we definitely intend to sell gas, and we have many CNG stations across the country. Third, we are, I think, the largest EV charging station available in the country, with more than 3,000 EV charging stations across the country. Today, we have LNG by road, which we have positioned at certain outlets. So what I just wanted to tell you is, depending on the nature of energy, which would be critical at that point of time, these outlets, which are today known as petrol pumps, would get transitioned into something else. The name can change, but the nodes remain. These nodes can also function to supply the daily needs of people, to aggregate the agricultural produce from the villages, to supply spare parts, to be a partner of Bosch, to supply very critical components. So as we see it, that these are nodes in a network, and they can be utilized to supply, to retail, to deliver any solutions or products as the case would be. So we are developing these outlets in that direction. Yes, many of them may not be able to adapt, but a large portion of them, we are sure that they'll be able to adapt, and they need to be trained accordingly so that this continuity remains.
So now I'm going to come back to the panel and put them all on the spot. I'm going to begin with you, Ritesh, and I'll end with Baba. Give one piece of advice to anyone who is wanting to take their company global, and try and give the advice from a learning that you have had personally. You know, and it can be sector agnostic. So what advice would you give?
I think start small and be perseverant. Don't accept failure too early. We started Malaysia in 2015, I think. When as a company only we were a year or 2 years old. But first year was a very bad outcome, right? Like owner said, we don't want to do business with you. Client said, we don't know the brand. Should we use it at all or not? And most people, including our board, convinced me that you should shut this business down. So I said, okay, I'll shut it down. But allow me to keep $50,000 a year budget for 2-3 years. If it doesn't work, 3 years is $150,000. We'll make more income than that from like Gurgaon city, right? So please allow me that much budget. So the board allowed me for 2-3 years to say that, okay, most times board says that 99% CEO agrees, 1% they are always generally considerate, saying that, we'll let him do what he wants to. I think those 3 years are very valuable. We use the time to perfect our model for saying, what do our storefront owners want? What do clients want? What kind of a product experience work? Suddenly in 3 years, that 3 or 4 hotels became into 300 hotels, and the business was churning cash. When we had to have a discussion of saying that, well, now should we consider taking this to Indonesia and other places? So I think it's very easy to fail. It doesn't happen overnight. Start small so that you're not risking a lot of capital, and then be at it, and there will always be success at the end of the tunnel. These are 2 learnings for me.
Wonderful. Sunil?
I think from my viewpoint, the most important thing is that open to learn. If you are open to new idea, and no idea is a foolish idea. And actually the most foolish ideas at some point of time in our life, which are branded as the foolish ideas, become the most innovative ideas tomorrow. So if you were to look at the other geographies and other people, be open to learn, and as he rightly said, that the perseverance, and don't deter from the failures.
Great. Sujoy?
Since our investments are generally large, I would say to be a bit, do a bit of homework to identify the geography, to understand the ethos, and then invest well and stay invested with seriousness, understand them, empathize, and then go ahead to succeed.
Wonderful. Baba, you have the last word.
Well, all these other panelists come from very different sectors. I come from a manufacturing sector. It's a large sector. And of course, it's a very global sector. And today, India is at an inflection point in this sector, because the tide is turning in our favor as we move forward in this decade. But so is the global opportunity. The biggest opportunity globally today is lack of talent that is there in the globe. In most developed markets, 20 years ago, you would think Germany had the best engineers or the United States had the best technologists. Today is exactly the other way around. It's Indians who are running those companies. And therefore, if you want to go global, my one single piece of advice, be very sure that you have a product that is capable of standing on its own 2 feet in that market.
Wonderful. Thank you all. This has been a real privilege for me to moderate this panel. And I hope you picked up something on how to take Indian companies global. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's have a very big round of applause once again for our panelists. Thank you to our moderator, Dr. Sinha. Thank you for steering that conversation. And thank you to the panelists for guiding us in taking just the right actions in the right direction. May I request you to give us a photo opportunity, gentlemen, on stage? The photographer awaits a group photo. Ladies and gentlemen, a very important announcement now on the post-tea break sessions. We're now going to be breaking for tea, but we have parallel sessions post the tea break. From 4 o'clock to 5:30, we have a session here in the Crystal Ballroom on mobilizing higher tax revenues for financing India's development. And at 4:30 p.m., there's a session on establishing India's leadership in the digital economy of the future in the Regal Room on the first floor, where we have our chief guest, Sri Rajiv Chandrasekhar, Minister of State for Skill Development and Entrepreneurship in Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India, gracing that session. So, ladies and gentlemen, there are going to be 2 sessions, one with the ministerial session, which is in the Regal Room on the first floor. And there's tea, coffee organized adjacent to that room as well. And for the members who are going to be attending the 4 o'clock session here in this Crystal Room on higher tax revenues, mobilizing for financing India's development, there's tea organized here in the lawns. So I'm going to request you to please make a note of these parallel sessions. So this I announced in the beginning, this was a virtual session. So ladies and gentlemen, now it's time to break for tea, but when we come back, please make a note that there are 2 sessions that are going to run parallelly, like there were 2 sessions during this time. There is a virtual session right now also at 3 o'clock, which is an in-conversation session. You can view it in the Regal Room on the first floor. And there is tea coffee organized, ladies and gentlemen, next to the Regal Room as well. But after the tea coffee break, when we come back here in the Crystal Room for 4 o'clock, there is a session that will begin here at 4 o'clock on mobilizing higher tax revenues for financing India's development here in the Crystal Ballroom. And at 4:30 p.m., the ministerial session takes place in the Regal Room. And that's why we've organized tea coffee there as well. Regal is on the first floor. Also, right now, there is a conversation going on virtually, and there is a viewing happening at Regal Room first floor, which I announced earlier as well, on the future of global economy and India's place, with Mr. Borge Brende, President, World Economic Forum, and Dr. Naushad Forbes, past President CIA and Co-Chairman Forbes Marshall Private Limited. Since it's only 3:04, it must have started at 3 o'clock. So once again, there is a session going on now virtually, and also the viewing is happening in the Regal Room. Then after the tea coffee break, when we come back, tea coffee break ends at 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock here in the Crystal Room, we have 1 session on mobilizing higher tax revenues. And then the ministerial session will start at 4:30 p.m. in the Regal Room. I'm going to request you to take a look at your agendas also and make sure you make your choice. The tea coffee is being served adjacent to both Regal Room as well as here in the lawns also. Thank you very much once again, ladies and gentlemen. Coming in person.
यहाँ इधर से
Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I'd like to inform all of you that we're going to have two almost overlapping sessions now after the tea break. At 4 o'clock, we will start a session here on mobilizing higher tax revenues for financing India's development here in the Crystal Ballroom. And at 4:30 p.m., we will have a ministerial session where Sri Rajiv Chandrasekhar, Minister of State for Skill Development and Entrepreneurship in Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India, is going to be joining us in person in the Regal Room on the first floor. That session starts at 4:30 p.m. So the one here is at 4 o'clock, and then there's a session at 4:30 p.m. in the Regal Room on the first floor, which is a ministerial session. So these sessions are going to run almost parallelly, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, the session here will start first at 4 o'clock, and thereafter at 4:30, we will have a session on establishing India's leadership in the digital economy of the future in the Regal Room on the first floor. I request all those of you who can probably hear me outside to kindly come in the room and take seats, please. We are going to be starting at 4 o'clock sharp in this room. There's going to be a session on mobilizing higher tax revenues for financing India's development here in the Crystal Ballroom with panelists who are going to be gracing the days. Shri Tarun Bajaj, former Secretary, Department of Revenue, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Dr. R. Kavita Rao, Director, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. Dr. Alexander Clem, Division Chief, Tax Policy 2 Division, Fiscal Affairs Department, International Monetary Fund, and Dr. Sebastian S. James, Senior Economist with the World Bank Group. So they're all going to be joining us, and this session will be moderated by Mr. Rajiv Memani, Chairman and Regional Managing Partner, Ernst & Young, India, and Chairman, Global Emerging Markets Committee, Ernst & Young, LLP. I request you, ladies and gentlemen, to do join us here at 4 o'clock in the Crystal Ballroom. And then 4:30, there will be a ministerial session on establishing India's leadership in the digital economy of the future on the first floor in the Regal Room. And there we have our chief guest, Sri Rajiv Chandrasekhar, Minister of State for Skill Development and Entrepreneurship in Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India, joining us in person at 4:30. We also have Mr. Sanjeev Bajaj, President, CIN Chairman and Managing Director, Bajaj Finserv Limited, chairing that session. So these are the two sessions, ladies and gentlemen, that will take place post tea coffee break. Tea coffee has also been organized adjacent to the Regal Room for those of you who want to attend the session in the Regal Room, the ministerial session. And of course, there has been tea coffee in the lawns for all of us here at the Crystal Room as well. So we're going to be starting at 4 o'clock. Once again, thank you very much for being here with us. And this is an announcement for all those of you who are still outside to maybe join us back in the room and be seated. Thank you very much.
Hello, Vibha, can you hear me? Vibha, can you hear me? Hello? I have logged in, nobody's there.
Nobody's there? So okay, let me just check. My
Yeah.
colleague Shushma was supposed to be there.
Yeah.
I'll just call him.
Yeah,
That's
please,
no problem.
thanks.
Okay.
Maybe she wanted me to come a little early for.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Before we start with the session on mobilizing higher tax revenues for financing India's development here in the Crystal Ballroom, I have a few very important announcements to make. There is going to be a sort of an overlap. There are going to be parallel sessions. 4:30 p.m. we have a session on establishing India's leadership in the digital economy of the future in the Regal Room on the first floor. That will be graced by our chief guest, Shri Rajiv Chandrasekhar, Minister of State for Skill Development and Entrepreneurship and Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India. Ladies and gentlemen, so there are going to be two sessions. Of course, as we move forward, we'll gain understanding in the upcoming session on mobilizing higher tax revenues for financing India's development, the importance of raising tax revenues in an equitable manner without impacting the investment attractiveness of India for global investors. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be requesting our distinguished panelists to please now grace the dais. I'd also like to apprise you that Dr. Vijay L. Kelkar, Chairman, India Development Foundation and former Finance Secretary, Government of India, is joining us virtually. And there he is. Please put your hands together and welcome him, ladies and gentlemen. There he is, Dr. Vijay L. Kelkar. Warm welcome to you, sir. Namaskar. Let me now invite our esteemed dignitaries on stage. May I invite Shri Tarun Bajaj, former Secretary, Department of Revenue, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Let's welcome him on stage with a big round of applause. A warm welcome to you, sir. May I invite Dr. R. Kavita Rao, Director, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. Let's welcome the lady with a big round of applause. Dr. R. Kavita Rao. Namaskar, ma'am. A very warm welcome to you. I'd like to invite Dr. Alexander D. Clem, Division Chief Tax Policy 2 Division, Fiscal Affairs Department, International Monetary Fund. Let's welcome Dr. Alexander D. Clem on stage. A very warm welcome to you. May I invite Dr. Sebastian S. James, Senior Economist Tax Policy, the World Bank Group. Let's welcome Dr. Sebastian S. James, ladies and gentlemen, on stage. A very warm welcome to you, sir. And this session is going to be moderated by Mr. Rajiv Memani, Chairman and Regional Managing Partner, eBuy India, and Chairman, Global Emerging Markets Committee, Ernst & Young LLP. Let's welcome him on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Rajiv Memani. A very warm welcome to you, sir. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we begin with the session on mobilizing higher tax revenues for financing India's development. It's now over to our moderator, sir, please.
Yeah. Thank you very much. A very good afternoon to all of you. And it's a real privilege to moderate such a distinguished panel. And whilst I've greeted everyone here, just a very special hello to Dr. Vijay Kelkar. I'm seeing him after a long time. He's a very dear friend of my father. So nice to see you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I just wanted to set the context for this session. We have, as I said, a very global panel, very distinguished panel, people with very different experiences and hopefully different points of views as well. Indian economy today, I think all of us will agree, is probably one of the shining spots in the global economy. And a lot of people have taken some predictions on what the numbers will be when India completes 100 years, and as we are calling the next 25 years as the Amrit Kal. And there could be numbers of the size of economy being anywhere from 20 trillion to 25 trillion to some even higher than that of the economy. To reach such a stage in economy, and all of us feel very confident that the economy should do very well, is doing very well. There are some critical enablers for that. And I would say one of the enablers would be that the government expenditure, if we look at the government expenditure as a percentage of GDP around the world for economies of this size or even smaller, India's government expenditure is actually on the lower side. So the government expenditure has to move up, and a lot of that in social areas, whether that is health, education, skilling, and a lot of those areas. The second thing that one would say is the government also has to front end some of the capital expenditure spent. One would also assume that the fiscal deficit numbers have to come down over a period of time. And if given that India's non-tax revenues have been at a certain level and they're not showing that much buoyancy, a lot of the revenue collection burden is going to go on tax revenues. And if we look at India's tax GDP ratio, I think it's been pretty, you can say stable, stagnant, whatever is the word one has to use, in the around 17%. Last 2 years has been 17.5. This year also we hope it will be in that 17.5% vicinity. And typically it's been in that kind of ratio. And if I look at the revenue collection, last year we had a tax buoyancy of almost 1.7. Tax revenues were higher by 33-34%. This year also, the anticipation is based on the interviews that we've been reading. The anticipation is that the tax revenues should be higher by 16 to 17%. So if you look at a nominal GDP growth rate of 14-15%, a tax buoyancy of 1.1 and over that. So at least on the tax front, the news has been good over the last 2-3 years in the way the tax collection has progressed. And there is always a question of whether the tax GDP ratio of 17% or so, if we compare that with the global average of 33%, some countries in OECD, like France having almost in the 40s, Germany 38% tax to GDP ratio. But if I look at the Asia Pacific average, it's about 19%. And these countries have a pretty high per capita income. And I'm sure we'll get some stats from Mr. Tarun Bajaj. In India, 90% of the people who file the return of income have income levels of less than 10 lakh rupees. So, the per capita income has a strong impact on the tax, what the tax GDP ratio is. So given this view, whether India's tax GDP ratio is adequate, it is not adequate, whether it should be higher. But one thing is very clear, that if India has to achieve the number that they want to achieve, the tax GDP ratio should probably be somewhere around 22-23%. If we do the math on what it is required, I think that's where at least our view is that that's something that the tax GDP ratio should be. Now, whether it'll move up as per capita income grows up, We know that there are some parts of our economy that are not taxed, primarily being agriculture. There are some pieces where whether, some forms of super rich taxation or some taxes which are not there, whether it's wealth tax, estate duty, the impact of that. The revenue, foregone revenue numbers between both direct tax and direct tax, although they have a role that has to be played in moving the economy forward. What is the extent of that? How do we look at new digital taxation as India becomes more and more consumer of digital goods and services? How does that tax revenue that's foregone or lost, how does that play in? So these are some of the things. We have an exceptional panel, and these are some of the things that we will play in. And what I felt was we can start this session, and I would be requesting each of the speakers if they could make initial remarks for about 5 minutes or so. And then, once everyone has, completed that, then we'll ask some questions based on the remarks that they have made. I'll take this opportunity, and I would request our former Revenue Secretary, as rightly said, he was earlier Economic Affairs, very distinguished stint both in the PMO and Ministry of Finance. And as I had the privilege of dealing and interacting with him, he has been one of the finest officers for the country, and has done a really tremendous job as the Revenue Secretary, earlier as Economic Affairs Secretary. So congratulations. And with that, I will hand over, if you can start, and then we will move forward.
Rajiv, if you don't mind, can I pass the baton to Dr. Kelkar? Dr. Kelkar is somebody we have seen him while growing up, and he's been an ideal for all of us.
Yes.
So I think he should be the first one.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I thought once you've made your remarks, he could have some critical remarks on that. So that's why I wanted to let you speak and then make some comments. But I think, like a smart bureaucrat, you've passed the past. But for all those people who have had the privilege of knowing Dr. Vijay Kelkar, as was mentioned, he was former Finance Secretary. He was Secretary in the Ministry of MOPNG, and has done some seminal work on public policy, public-private partnerships. Also given the Padma Vibhushan in 2011. But one of the most important things that I remember, first time I heard the word GST was in 2003, in one of the documents that he had released, or under his chairmanship, that document was released. So, sir, Dr. Kelkar, over to you, please.
Rajiv, first let me thank you for very, very kind remarks. And I recall meeting you and along with your father, and you were quite indulgent at that time. And I'm especially happy to see my other panelist, particularly Mr. Bajaj, who has been very gracious. But I really feel like Rip Van Winkle here. I don't know if you know the story of Rip Van Winkle. He was a fellow who goes to a cave and slept for 15 years and suddenly woken up to ask to come back. And we have found the words. In the area, I really feel like Rip Van Winkle. So very kind of you to ask me to come. I'll make 2 or 3 remarks, may not be just to start the ball rolling. First is, I think you're absolutely right that tax deliberation in India is not at all bad. I mean, I think it's comparable at that level of income. But in fact, people don't realize some is understated. In fact, in India, our public sector pricing policy really works as a taxation. If you notice, particularly look at our electricity pricing and railway freight pricing, for instance. It's the same taxation. I mean, if you had a market-based prices, the prices would have been much lower, and taxes would have been put on those commodities, and tax could have been collected. So, what should have been government's revenue is intermediated by public sector enterprises, the public sector pricing. So, my suspicion is that this phenomenon is ubiquitous, both the central government and state governments. So maybe the tax GDP ratio is much more than what really perhaps our official numbers show. So it's not something we should not sort of grudge our performance. I think India has been a very sort of careful in our fiscal affairs, and what Tarun and his colleagues have been doing are absolutely exemplary. The way they manage the fiscal space in very turbulent times, my heartiest congratulations to him and his colleagues. So one point is that I think our tax GDP ratio is not something out of way. It's quite consistent with the levels of income, and it's going to grow. So that's one point. Second, and Kavita will correct me, I think it was Professor Bird, very famous Canadian economist, public finance. He always says that countries, developing countries like India, tax policy is tax administration. In other words, he says that it's revolved around the tax administration. And there again, what India has made a number of strides in improving tax administration. I think compliance costs are declining and probably further improved. But I recall, Kavita, that the estimate made by NIPFP, by just introducing a tax investment network, we increased our tax GDP ratio by 150 basis points. So I think that's a really remarkable done by the Department of Revenue and our administration people. So of course, more things can be improved. I'll make only one point and then I'll conclude my remarks. I think the way I see it, the real challenge is going to be making available resources to our third tier urban local bodies and other bodies, because your public goods creation, now I live in periphery, I don't live in privileged capital of India, and I see this tremendous gap between what is required for the growth requirement of the urban areas that was available. So I think the real challenge is going to look like is urban finance, but that's a point probably we can take up later. So I'll just initial remarks, I'll stop here. But once again, thank you very much. I thank CII. I don't mind telling that since Tarun Das's days, CII was always a favorite of ours in the government as an institution. I am glad that under Chandrakant is continuing to do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kelkar. Can I request you and then?
Thank you, Rajiv. I'll just make brief comments of the last 2-3 years as to what has happened. And I think a lot has changed in the Department of Revenue and the revenue administration in the country. So just to recollect that, and then I'll also like to speak a little bit about the tax GDP ratio, which both Dr. Kelkar and Rajiv have spoken about. So first of all, during the COVID time, we really didn't know where we were going, both on the economic side, on the revenue side. But I would say that the Department of Revenue was trying to do certain things at that point of time, and coincidentally, all of them came together. So one of the things that happened at that time was the use of technology and use of technology, AI, extensively, one, to expand the base of the taxpayers and also to ensure better compliance, which was also mentioned by Dr. Kelkar and Rajiv before that. So I think that was one factor which really went into, and the results that have come out are, I think, much more than what we had expected. For example, on the direct taxes front, last year, the buoyancy was 2.5. So 49% increase in tax revenue, and the GDP grew by less than 20% in that year. So that was something that I don't think any of the economists or anybody had anticipated, and it was a big thing. But one very important thing that is also something that I need to share with you is that the number of taxpayers didn't go up as much. The number of taxpayers or the people filing their returns went up by almost 2 to 3% only. So the same taxpayers were paying more taxes. So perhaps technology, better compliance was able to help us. The second is simplification of the tax laws it is happening in bits and pieces in the present code. Maybe the better option would have been if we had done a wholesale rewriting of the code itself. But for example, corporate tax rates, in 18, we brought down the corporate tax rate to 22% without any exemptions. So you would be surprised to know that almost 20, 21, 22% of the number of corporates have actually entered the new regime, but 65 to 68% of the income has entered into the new regime. So basically people have moved into this simplified tax laws, and I think that itself gives more revenue, and the stance of the policymakers then has been vindicated that in the last year, our revenues from corporate tax were the highest, and they are still growing in a very healthy manner. So that was the second aspect that I would say. A lot of work needs to be done on this area. On the personal income tax, it needs to be done. On the capital gains tax, it needs to be done. And there are many other exemptions and things like that, which are there in the code, which need to be rewritten, so that if the code is made simple, if people are made to pay or their tax rates are brought down, or the slabs are increased, or the width is increased, even if it's a revenue neutral exercise, I would still say in theory it may be a revenue neutral exercise, but in practical terms, when it comes back, I think we'll get greater revenue, because once the tax laws are simplified, there'll be less of litigation and more of tax revenues that will come to us, which has been the case even earlier. We used to have 92% tax rates in the earlier times, which were brought down, and tax revenues actually went up. And the third thing is that on the tax GDP ratio, I'll answer the other questions, maybe I'll exceed. On the tax GDP ratio, I have actually gone through the tax GDP ratio graph, which is presented in the budget every year, and I find in 16-17 and 17-18, for the central taxes, that is the direct taxes and indirect taxes, it was about 11.2, and last year it would have been about 11.6. And the year previous to that, it was about 10.7. So it went up from 10.7 to 11.6, 11.5 in one single year. Now, if you look at it, I feel there is some stability in two taxes in this country, though a lot is being done and needs to be done in those taxes. One is the direct taxes, the corporate and the income tax. As I've already said, something needs to be done. But if you look at the tax buoyancy there, I think we are seeing a good tax buoyancy. As I said, last year it was 2.5. This year also, if we go, it should not be less than 1.7, 1.8. So a buoyancy of 1.7, 1.8 coming over a buoyancy of 2.5. And so there is something which is happening in this system which needs to be looked into, and maybe Kavita should look into it and tell us as to what is happening and what is it that we are doing right and what is it that we need to do more right so that this continues. Similarly, on the GST, if we look at it, last year the growth rate was almost 30%. This year, again, we'll grow between 23 to 25, 22% on GST, which is, again, I would say, a tax that has stabilized in some senses, that these are the commodities, this is the way it will be taxed. So the uncertain feature in the tax structure are two structures, which is the excise duty and the customs duty. We actually raise the excise duty or reduce the excise duty. We raise the customs duty or we reduce the customs duty. So there is some kind of ad hocism, or there is some kind of reactions to macroeconomic situations or the needs of the country that make us do that. And because of that, the tax GDP ratio changes. So I think academicians should actually look at tax GDP ratio in different buckets for these particular taxes. And then maybe we can come out in a better manner to understand what is happening to the tax GDP ratio of the country. I'll just stop here, and maybe during the questions, I'll be happy to answer other questions which Rajiv was asking me outside.
That will be a fun conversation. Thank you very much, Mr. Bajaj. Kavita, Dr. Kavita Rao, as was introduced, she's a director in NIFPFP and also done a lot of interesting work on tax research, especially I know in the design and implementation of GST, around incentives, around compliances. She's done a lot of work. So Kavita, if you can make introductory remarks, 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. I guess this tax GDP ratio has been bugging all of us for a long time. And the last Finance Commission report again brought it to the fore, and we are all debating on whether we are doing enough, not doing enough, and so on. And what I think we should, as a country, be looking forward to, and I will take the conversation into a completely different direction, is to start asking the question about, is there an issue of compliance which we need to deal with beyond what technology helps us do? What I'm trying to ask is, I'll give a little example and then I'll take it forward. I was trying to do a little survey of ordinary taxpayers to figure out what they believe about compliance in the country, and what they believe about expenditures by governments. And the general norm seems to be that everybody believes they are very honest, but there's a large set of people who are not honest. And they also believe that government doesn't spend on what we would like it to spend on. So I think there is a need to have a slightly elongated conversation with the citizen to reframe the relationship between the social contract between the citizen and the state. One issue of concern that I keep thinking about is the perception that a lot of middle class, especially salaried employees in the country put across, is that we are a country where we, the middle class, the salaried people, have no choice but to pay tax. Everybody else has a choice and therefore they don't pay too much tax. And we don't get enough from the government for the taxes we pay. So we need to correct this whole perception that a lot of people are not paying tax. And I think one step in that direction also is to make sure we don't change the rates of tax, we don't change the exemption thresholds too often, so that in the bracket creep itself, people will start entering the tax net instead of reducing the number of people who are liable to tax. I will leave it at that, and we can take it further from there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rao. Can I request Alex, if you could make some of your introductory remarks? Alex heads the tax policy division for IMF, Fiscal Affairs Department of IMF, and has done does a lot of tax analytics work and also a lot of capacity development in Asia, Africa, and also the developed world. So Alex, good to get a global viewpoint on this subject would be really great.
Yes, of course, with pleasure. So let me start with a difficult statement, which is that, of course, there is no optimal tax ratio that we can figure out around the world. We can talk later about tax gaps and so on and how that is done. But if we talk about optimal tax ratio, there is no answer to it. There is pretty strong empirical evidence that once you go below 12 or 15% of GDP, you will be a fragile country and there's no way out of it. But clearly, once you are beyond that, and India certainly is beyond that, then there is no single answer like that. So the best way to approach this question is maybe to think about, are there potential public projects, either socially or in infrastructure, that are either good for growth or good for reducing inequality, potential projects with very high payoffs that exceed the cost of raising the additional revenue. And the cost of raising the additional revenue, of course, is not just the cost of the revenue you raise, but also any deadweight loss that is unavoidable whenever you have taxation. And most likely the answer to this question is yes. I mean, in India, there's so much need of improving inequality, addressing poverty, boosting growth. So I would assume there are plenty of high return projects that could be funded from additional public resources from higher taxes. Now, if I approach this question now from a really bird's eye view, how can one boost taxes? I think the really basic answer to that is usually it's best to stick to very few taxes and design them extremely well. So instead of having a long list of taxes and excises on this and on that, there should be a very strong GST, a very strong personal and corporate income tax, selected excises wherever you have to deal with externalities, and then maybe a property tax or something like that. And apart from that, better refrain from adding more taxes and instead improve these taxes in terms of how much they raise, but also in terms of how efficient they can be. And maybe as a final remark on this overview here, I would like to mention that at the IMF, jointly with some other institutions, we have recently been developing a new approach, which is called medium-term revenue strategy. The idea of this approach is that we help countries design a strategy to raise revenue ratios over a medium term, so not just one budgetary period, but 3 or 4 years, and to tie this directly to some spending increases that they want to do and that are growth increasing or poverty reducing. The idea being is, of course, nobody wants to pay more tax, but it's much easier for people to accept to pay more tax if it's tied at the broad sense to something that is useful to them. And of course, that promise then also has to be kept. And indeed, it has to be spent on these useful things. Just to clarify, I don't mean that the tax should be earmarked, go into a separate pot. That would be a pretty bad idea. I meant more politically, it should be tied and it should be linked to these improving spending. Happy to follow up on any of these points.
Very much. I will now pass it on to Dr. Sebastian James. Dr. Sebastian James is a senior economist I see with the World Bank. Again, he's done a lot of work with developing countries around the world in designing their tax systems and also tax policy, tax administration. So over to you, Dr. James. Thank you.
And it's lovely to hear from the distinguished panelists here. It'll be tough to follow up on their act. Let me make a few additional comments. I think that is quite, I think, pertinent to what I'd like to say. And so the question, like Alex mentioned, is there an optimal rate that we should have, we should aim for? And what is the tax country should collect is a political decision. It's the government's decision to decide how much of the private income it should take and then tending to go high, then you know there is a revenue pressure or there's an expenditure pressure. But is it because of overspending or under collection? This is a very difficult question to answer. But what we could do is we could look at other countries that are like you and see how they do and then compare how you do, right? And in that sense, it would say if you control for level of income, now India is a large country, we have a huge GDP, but our per capita income is quite low. So there is certain limits on what you could essentially tax out of this country. So why would be there only 5% of people filing tax returns? Because a large number of Indians do not have adequate income that would be taxable, right? And so if you control for per capita income, India actually does not bad. It would be right on average. And is average good? That's something we should decide. We should agree on. We can debate on. On overall revenue, we are right on average. On VAT, we actually collect more than average. On income tax, we collect right on average. Excises on average. Trade taxes, customs duties, we do less. But the whole idea of customs duty has changed. In the past, it used to be fundamentally a revenue collecting mechanism. Nowadays, it's more used for different purposes. It's mostly used as a means to manage certain external events. And then you also have property taxes. Actually, we do quite well. If you look at it, if you add up all the, and so the other thing is that keep in mind when we look at all our data, we typically get central government data, but the states collect a lot of GST. But these states collect a lot of VAT. So when you add them all together, actually we do quite well on the indirect taxes on that side. So the question is like, should we collect more? And yes, I think there is scope for collecting more, especially on income taxes. What should we do? And Kavita mentioned, only 5% of our people pay income tax. She talked about bracket creep. The question is, why is it possible that that only 5% of people have taxable income? Is it possible that there are many people who have taxable income but not filing tax returns, who are understating their incomes? Okay, so there is and the reason we may wonder why this might be the case, and there is also it's like you mentioned, am I getting something back from the tax system for which I should pay taxes? And that is the tax morale issue. And that's the question which everybody would ask. If you have an option not to pay, I would rather not pay because I'm not getting anything out of it. So one thing I think, when I think about India's tax system of the future and looking at other countries, their tax systems, I think what we are missing would be adding to the list that Alex just mentioned, I would say social contributions, the social security tax. Essentially what happens in most of these countries is so we do have an old age pension, but it's paid out of the general budget. It's a very small amount of pension. But what we could do is collect a social security tax that goes into your individual accounts. And it starts from zero. It starts from, if you earn 1 rupee, you collect a small percentage of it. It could be 5%. But what happens is that goes into your individual accounts. And when you retire, you get a pension. And so it's a funded pension system paid out of your tax money that you paid all through your life. And what happens is people say, okay, I'm going to get something out of it. When I retire, I don't need to worry. I'm going to depend on, my savings and other things. Well, it's great to have savings, but I don't need to worry that I'll not have any money when I retire. Right? So that's, and also for my health expenses. So that is one thing I think we could think about having. Second thing is that we have right now we are on the positive side, on the demographic side, right? We have a demographic dividend. We have a lot of young people than old people. Now these young people will become old one day. So we need to think about what will they do when they grow old. So the idea is that we need to prepare now. So if we could start this, and then because it starts with 1 rupee, anybody who has any amount of any wages would be contributing to their account. And interestingly, we have our PAN number as a permanent account number. It's an account number. Essentially, it could be in your own PAN, right? And that account number, you can actually see your money accumulating over your lifetime. It's because it's funded out of your incomes throughout your lifestyle. So it's something we can think about in the future. And on the third point, there's only so much tax can do, because for what is tax? It's a collection of some amounts of money from economic activity. So fundamentally, it's economic activity that drives the taxes. And we need to understand what can we do about increasing economic activity. And one thing that is troubling for India is that we are ranked on 85 on the Transparency Index on corruption. So it is a fact that corrupt countries tend to have stunted growth. So we need to deal with that issue. When we tackle corruption, when our regulatory systems are freer, when our systems, our business decisions are taken purely by business need, when businesses don't need to worry about doing economic activity, this actually makes the system move smoothly. And this creates goal, right? And on that, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it'll be what I'll do now is we'll probably have a few questions, and also I'll start. From the panel discussion, there's no right percentage of what the tax GDP ratio is. But at the same time, with India's fiscal deficit that we have, and also the social needs that the government has, clearly percentage to go up. I think none of us will say that India is a low as per what we heard from Dr. James as well, that I think it is a probably highly taxed country. Maybe there are some pockets that are not taxed as much. and maybe compliance is a bit of an issue. But it'll be good to get your views on what do you think can be done, should be done, to raise the tax revenues in India without necessarily changing with more taxes or changing tax rates.
So before I start, and lest somebody should take another message, I would say there is no need to raise tax rates. So that is the first part that I'd like to say before I come up with the seven crore odd people who pay taxes to us, and this data is dated about 2 years ago. Only 7 crore file returns. The remaining 4 crores don't file returns. Now, I don't say that all 4 crores are bound to file returns, because I may have done a one-odd transaction on which you have deducted TDS. I'm happy with that. I am less than the minimum income on which tax starts. So I'm not filing a return. I'm not mandated to file a return, so it's fine. But I would say that the audience here and all of you would agree that saying that 4 crore people who pay taxes in some form do not file returns is something that we can be comfortable with. I don't think as an administrator, having worked in the government, I'll be very comfortable that these 4 crore people who are not filing returns and not showing their incomes properly are is something that can be a matter of comfort for us. So that is the first part of it. The second part of it is that we are now in the process of formalizing our economy more and more. The more we are formalizing our economy, the more the income tax and the GST is getting connected to the MCA data, it is getting connected. We find that corporates generally have been paying taxes and are paying taxes. There may be some evasion there. I don't say that there won't be any evasion there, but yes. But now let us look at the salaried class. As somebody here said, that the salaried class is the one that feels that we pay taxes and the others don't pay taxes. So when we looked at data, we found that non-corporate, only salaried class returns on an average were paying taxes of about 75,000 to 80,000 rupees per return, which was being filed. The non-corporate, non-salaried were only paying 39,000 rupees per return. Now, as has been said here, maybe they have a perception that the government is not spending money properly, that they don't need to pay taxes. But I would say that there is more to it than this simple argument that because the government doesn't spend in the manner that I want it to spend, that's why I'll not pay taxes. Or is it the way that I will not pay taxes? That is why I will say that the government is not spending its money properly. We may be somewhere in the middle, but this is a problem which is there. Now, what has happened is last year, our portal did not function properly. And a train doesn't reach in time, meets an accident, makes big news. It made big news. There was another train, which is called the AIS, Annual Information System, by which we were collecting data on taxpayers, on their investments, on their incomes, on their property purchase, on their property sale. That also was rolled out at the same time that that portal was rolled out. And that gave us a lot of information, and we threw that information to the taxpayer, and the taxpayer was then supposed to look at it and pay his taxes. And that is why I'll again emphasize the point that with the same taxpayers, we got much more taxes. And if I look at the taxes this year, in the personal income tax space, the tax that is coming is, in terms of percentage growth, is far better than the corporate tax growth. So basically, it signifies statistically, perhaps, that there was some evasion, and that is actually coming up. Now, what are we doing on this? Or what is it that we can do? What is what Rajiv was asking? So the whole idea is that you throw this data. A lot of chartered accountants, not knowing me at the time of filing returns, sent me messages that people here have no incomes till you see their AIS. And once we saw their AIS and we told them that you'll have to file taxes on these, they said, no, we have already given TDS. So they were explained that TDS is not taxes. You have to pay taxes by filing returns. So now notices have started going wherever there is a mismatch between what was shown in the AIS and what is the return that you filed or what is the tax you have not filed. So once that is going on, then people have the option of filing updated returns. Let me tell you, there are about 5 lakh updated returns that must have come by now. When I left, the figure was a little lower than that. These updated returns are people who want to correct their return which they had filed. And almost 300 to 400 crores of rupees have come. And out of this, 22,000 returns are corporate returns that have come, which people are filing as updated returns because some kind of income they had not actually truly mentioned in their returns, which they want to file now. So I think once we are able to, and the third thing that we are trying to do is that I find that the government cannot reach out to the taxpayer asking them pay taxes. The government cannot go to their house and say pay taxes. So we have to create a situation by which they start paying taxes. So what do? People who have not filed returns, and now not only based on your income, but on certain other matters, if you've had a foreign trip, if you have had so much of cash dealings in your accounts. So there are some other criteria also, based on which if you are supposed to file a return, and if you don't file a return, then your TDS doubles. Maybe there's a requirement that after 2 years, this TDS should triple, or there should be a lien on their accounts or in their principal amount so that people will start paying taxes. So I think if we take these measures and if the number of people who are filing, if we can expand the base of the pyramid, I think we would be doing greater justice to the tax system in this country, rather than just saying that I need to bring more taxes in the form of wealth tax, estate duty, or increase the taxes on the richer people, because that will only put the burden on a few people. If these 7 crore people, I can say that for sure. I've actually seen that through statistics, that if today anybody getting an income of 6.5 to 7 lakhs doesn't have to pay taxes at all. If this is increased to 9 lakhs, maybe more people will start showing income of 9 lakhs. Even the 7 crore people that I was saying who file returns, 75% of people file return only up to 5 lakhs of income. So they pay zilch tax, they pay zero tax. And as Rajiv was saying, 90% of the people pay taxes on income which is less than 10 lakhs. So I think if we can broaden this, if we can bring these people into the tax net by nudging, by ensuring through technology, by reaching out to them through information, data that we have on them, and fourthly, through the process of TDS and TCS, that we collect the taxes through transaction methods so that people will start coming and filing returns. I think we would also achieve more people paying taxes, and also tax to GDP ratio could also go up. One small statistics, and I'll close there. On the GST, I want to say this again, statistics throwing at you, that there were 70 lakh people who were paying VAT before GST came into being 5 years ago. Today, that number is 1.4 crores. So once you formalize, once you get people into the system, they will start paying taxes. And once they start paying taxes, and last year, the growth that we have seen in GST from 1 lakh to about 140 now, which is the norm, is not because too much on account of the change of tax rates, but only because of these compliances, of these formalization that has happened in the economy.
Thank you very much. I think if I have to summarize, the substantive point really is how do we use technology more and more to increase the tax base and improve the levels of compliance rather than adding to any tax or changing, moderating any rates. Dr. Kavita Rao, I have one question, and I think this is something I have, I mean, you did mention that one of the ways of nudging people is also to have a better contract, or, government explaining the rationale of what's happening with that money. But I do feel, and the ease of doing business, and that issue was also raised. And, this entire amount of tax disputes and tax litigation that happens. Today we have almost probably close to 11 trillion rupees that's locked in tax disputes. And Mr. Bajaj knows this is one of my favorite subjects, and I've raised it with him many times. But I do feel that as a country, we probably need to do a better job of how we actually tackle with them. So I'm sure you have done a lot of research on this. It will be good to get your perspective. If you have any comments on what the others have said, and also, I think apart from improving the compliance, I think there is something that how we deal with litigation and tax disputes is something that can also help in improving tax revenues and tax compliance overall.
I'll make a quick point on the social security contributions issue before I. There are, I guess, a number of schemes now in India in operation which do a variant of what you are suggesting. What it effectively means is part one, does that money accrue to the government to do what it chooses with it, and therefore becomes a part of the tax. That brings you also to the question of when you have an aging population, how will you pay back what you're collecting by way of social security, which is the challenge a lot of developed countries are now facing, because they collected social security and now they have to pay out, and they have a very young, small youth. So I think counting it as tax today, I attempted the exercise, but it's very difficult to pull all of that information together. You would perhaps find a much higher tax to GDP ratio for India just by the sheer fact that you would add all the pension contributions, although they are mandatory pension contributions. So that is a numerical exercise. It doesn't change fundamentally what revenues the government has access to. So that is a question that I'm not sure India is heading down that path as a way of raising more revenues. Turning to the question, sir, you raised, I personally haven't done too much work on litigation. My colleagues, although have done some work on litigation, and the conclusions seem to be somewhat mixed, and therefore I will not roll them all out. The idea seems to be, however, that on the one side, people want a perception of stability in the tax system so that they have less contentious issues to deal with continuously. And but on the other hand, we want a nimble government which comes ahead and addresses every single concern that we have. So this is a peculiar trade-off that all citizens are asking of the government, where we want quick answers to anything that bothers us, but at the same time, we want a stable tax regime. And recently I was talking to somebody from the petroleum sector, and they were talking about the tax, the windfall tax. Said, this is unfair. I said, but you had a windfall, right? So what's the question? So the question then seems to be that, we would like to know going forward, can we institutionalize it so that it becomes predictable? So in times of uncertainty, we get a tax or a levy. Can we institutionalize it that going forward, it becomes predictable, which is an interesting way of putting it. So I guess the challenge is to ensure more stability. We try talking about simplicity, but I'm not convinced in income tax you can have a simple tax. GST, yes, but in income tax, a simple tax by definition is an oxymoron. And so we should attempt to simplify, but I think we have challenges down the path. Each time we try to simplify, we'll perhaps have more contentious litigations coming up. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I will, as we go around, I mean, if anyone has any comments on this, but I do believe that it is a massive issue for ease of doing business in India. And, given the role that we have of dealing with both government and business, I think there are both sides to it, but I think there is a clear need that needs to be, otherwise India will not be able to achieve neither its full business potential nor its full revenue potential. Alex, I just wanted to touch base on this entire digital economy. Historically, the way tax systems have been legislated, the producer of goods generally is the place where taxes are being paid. And OECD has always had a bias towards that. And I think there is a good, healthy debate right now that's going on. India has brought its own way of how they want to deal with something like that. But in the digital world, as the consumption of services goes, as there is more cross-border movement, what is the perspective on consumption based? I mean, there is obviously GST and indirect tax, but how do you tax income that is generated by global organizations, global companies, which is digitally transferred and consumed largely, I would say, in a lot of the large economies, large populations, emerging economies, who are consuming a lot of this. But taxes mostly accrue either in Ireland or some other matured market or some other place. So it'll be good to get your thoughts and perspective on that.
Yeah, thank you for this good question. So I think digitalization really is just an example where the issue that you raised, that maybe a lot of the value creation actually is in the place of consumption, where it is most visible, most starkly visible, but it's actually not only in the case of digitalization. We see this with other goods too. If you sell a normal good, like say medicine, the value of this medicine will be different in different markets. And that's because the demand is different in different markets. So abstracting from digitalization already, one could make the case for linking taxation, not only with the place of production, but also with the place of consumption. Now, we could go into the pure theory and come out with really very innovative and revolutionary ideas like taxing only based on the place of consumption. And we come up with things like destination-based cash flow taxes, which in theory work beautifully, but in practice, they are not on anybody's agenda. But we can also be a bit more modest. And if we are more modest, we end up with things like either digital service taxes. And I know in India, there is this equalization levy, actually two equalization levies, but we don't need to go into the details here. So they are an attempt to address this in one specific sector, but it's a problem that is actually not restricted to one sector. So therefore, it is an attempt to solve a problem, but unfortunately, it's kind of a ring-faced attempt to do this. And the latest development of this is now this proposal at the inclusive framework for BEPS. They have come up with an idea. It's all a bit confusing because they use lots of terms. Like in this case, it's called Pillar 1. It's actually called Amount A of Pillar 1. But for anybody who doesn't want to delve into these details, all you need to know is that there is this idea that for the largest multinationals on earth, one would take their global profits and calculate a part of that profit that we might call excess profit, specifically profits that exceed 10% of sales, and allocate a share of these profits to the country of final consumption to be taxed there. And this is not restricted to digital companies. It's all companies except for the financial sector and for the extractive industries. This reform has in principle been agreed by 141 countries last October 2021. It has not yet been implemented, but this is something that is important to know. In principle, 141 countries are committed to implementing this, and it would address this. But having now talked about how this works in theory, to make it more practical, you also asked about the revenue impact of all of that. And there, I have to say that the revenue impact is negligible. And that is true both of unilateral digital service taxes, including the one in India, but also what we have seen in many other countries. The revenues of these things, they are negligible. If we want to express it in percent of GDP, we talk about 0.01, 0.02, nothing more. So they might be important for cohesion of the system, but they actually do not raise very much. And the same is true of this Pillar 1 that I have just described. It would not raise very much. But of course, it would have the advantage that it would be the same approach all over the world, or let's say at least 141 countries, including India, rather than each country doing their own thing, which would make it much more complex for businesses. So to sum up, I think these are great approaches addressing a problem that is very stark in the digital sector, but actually occurs also outside the digital sector. But anybody who believes that this will resolve a revenue challenge is mistaken. It's not going to raise a lot. It's going to be, a small but positive revenue impact. Happy to follow up.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thanks. I think the only difference was in physical goods. We can go through the technicalities of what permanent establishment and how they work. And in a digital world, I think that's not required, but this is not a tax session, so I won't go there. Is Dr. Kelkar there? And
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Can
you hear me?
Can we move the? Yeah. Dr. Kelkar, Mr. Bajaj was mentioning that amongst the 3 taxes that are working most efficiently in India, corporate tax, personal tax, and GST.
Yeah.
So I thought it'll be good to get your perspective, and especially in the context that do you think, states are obviously asking for greater share in revenues. They're asking for a greater share in the GST pie as the cess period goes away. And also, do you think states are missing an opportunity to look at additional sources of revenue? It could be stamp duties, could be others as well. So it'll be good to get your perspective on that.
Thank you. Rajiv, can you hear me?
Your voice is not that audible. I think we'll have to raise the volume.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, now it's better. Yeah.
So Rajiv, before I answer that, let me respond to your earlier question about litigations. I think one way, and maybe Tarun may have already done it, one way, like when Moili Saab was a law minister, he tried to sort of get an exit policy accepted, which means at what level the government will not challenge the decision of the adjudicating authority. So no appeals. So no appeals, exit. And that way, I think you can reduce enormously the delays. If this is implemented quite rigorously, you perhaps can reduce the delays. But I just leave it at that. I think I'm afraid, Raju, as I mentioned earlier, I live now not in Delhi but in Pune. And I do feel that the states, rather than the states, is really the local bodies and corporations have much greater need for access to tax revenue. And what we now need to do, and I've been arguing that I restate that position, that we have to now make a third tier as one more consolidated fund of third tier, and we must start sharing the GST revenue with all the 3 arms of the government, center, state, and local bodies. Because all the local public goods, the demand is increasing, urbanization is taking place. And let me tell you, India is going to leave cities more and more in the coming years. So unless we improve the local public goods in the third tier, we'll have a lot of problems in the growth itself. So we require, I'll just put we may require amend Article number 266 of the Constitution, which creates a consolidated fund of, today we have a consolidated fund of India, a consolidated fund of states. We have to create a consolidated fund for third tier. And also amend Article 243 and ensure that the share of this goes directly to the third body. So in my view, rather than increasing state share, we have to really increase that the share of the third level by, we had a 73rd and 74th amendment by which you can have a transfer of funds, functions, and functionaries. And that will improve the governance and the supply of public goods. So I'm not a bit sympathetic with state asking more. I think it really should go to sharing. For instance, I'm just thinking aloud. Suppose I'm a one-point idea man. But my idea is a single GST rate. But suppose you accept my suggestion of single GST rate of 12% to start with. 5% go to center, 5% go to state, and 2% goes to state government, and to local bodies. So corporations, municipalities, elected bodies will also get access to funds. So this way, actually, the state plus the local bodies, the share will go more than 50%. But I don't want to give more to states because they don't pass on. Today, they did not pass on. And all this third level governments are suffering. Yes, there should be more devolution, but not to the states, but to the local bodies and corporations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll pass it on to Mr. Bajaj to say, why can't we just have one rate of GST tax, as Dr. Kelkar and many others have been advocating, or at least a simplified version as compared to what we have today?
So if you permit, on the litigation front, since that is something you have also discussed with me a number of times. The first of thing that I want to acknowledge is that this is a problem. And today the problem is that at the lowest level, which is the commissioners of appeals, they have about more than 4 lakh cases with them, and they are able to dispose of about 1 lakh cases every year. So this itself has become a problem, but I think some steps have been taken, and if we can actually do that, maybe litigation can come down. One thing for which the government can very rightfully take credit is that we did away with the retrospective taxation. So that took away 1,11,000 crores in one stroke of that legislation. So that was out of that, whatever number you're saying. The second thing which came up in the last budget was that if a case in a point is lying with the High Court or the Supreme Court, then if a similar point arises in the present assessment, that will not go for litigation if the assessee agrees that he'll abide by the decision of the High Court or the Supreme Court. So I think that has also a potential to reduce the tax liability, because other than the other tax disputes that we have, there would be about 24 issues that are lying in various courts that are required to be settled for these cases to go down. Now, what happens is that there is a particular issue which is there. So this year on the assessment, I raised that assessment. The assessee goes to the court. Next year, the same issue again comes. Again, I do that. And again, he goes to the court. So it only increases the litigation. So some attempt has been made in the last budget. And I think government is maybe thinking of actually improving on that and ensuring that less litigation takes place. The third is that instead of a person assessing the returns now it is a group assessment where 2 or 3 people in the faceless scheme will actually look at each assessment order and then make an order. One hopes that in the times to come, the quality of the assessment orders should improve and we would have lesser number of litigation. The other things which are being tried are the dispute resolution committee. I'll agree with Rajiv on that. He's told me that that has not actually started functioning well, but I think now the government has actually issued its guidelines, and this year we should see some of it actually functioning. So it will reduce, but nevertheless, I accept this point that there is an issue, and I'm very happy that the Supreme Court has also decided that 2 days in a week they will devote to tax litigation. So there is a process also which we have tried to do in the Supreme Court, is the bunching of cases. Similar cases are now being bunched together, and once that decision comes, then the litigation on that matter will go down. But yes, the litigation is something that needs to be taken care of. The second issue, Alex, on the BEPS, since I was involved in that, I have one great grievance which I can say that I'm out of the government. It is only when the West gets hurt that it's a problem. Otherwise, it is never a problem. Otherwise, we were criticized for Vodafone. We were criticized for Kane. But now, because the taxes are going to Cayman Islands, the taxes are going to Ireland, and the West, Europe and the West is suffering. So this has become a major issue. And if my prediction goes right, the Pillar 2 will actually get implemented much faster than Pillar 1. Pillar 1 will be a contentious issue. And even on that, 141 countries may have signed it. But if you ask the heart of those 141 countries, not even 41 countries' heart will be on the resolution that has come up. So the resolution that comes up there is something very different. So I would say, one, it's only 20 billion euros and above companies. It is only 10% more than 10% of profits. And there also only 25% of the profits will be shared. So the negotiation is an unequal negotiation that takes place. I can say that now that I'm outside the government. So even that decision, you will see I'm sure in the next CIA conference, if not here, I'll sit there and see whether BEPS has reached any conclusion or not. It'll be a very difficult conclusion. A lot of countries need their legislature to actually pass this. And I can say that I see a lot of difficulty in them actually passing this. And I agree with you. The revenues may not be very large today, but the potential of these revenues may be very large in the years to come. Because larger, this 20 billion is supposed to come down to 10 billion after a certain number of years. The companies will keep expanding, they'll keep growing, and that is how the revenues will grow. Your third point was, sorry, I'm taking. On GST, we had a small discussion, Dr. Kelkar, inside the room, which went a little hot. So I think Rajiv is taking advantage of that, and he wants to bring the same heat in this conversation. I was telling him in this country, we could not decide on textiles whether we can remove the inverted duty or not, because the traders wanted the inverted duty to continue, the manufacturer wanted the inverted duty to go away. And there was so much of noise in the outside, and Dr. Kelkar, no better person than you to understand that in this country, economic policy is not only economic policy, it is politico-economic policy. So you also have to take the politics side of that also into account. So I see very difficult today that you will tax atta or pre-packaged products like dahi at the same rate at which you will do the cars, the luxury cars, the aerated drinks, the cigarettes. So we need to have, maybe the rates, number of rates need to come down. I'm a votary saying that 5, 12 and 18 need to be brought down to 2 rates. But whether they can be brought down to 1 rate at this point of time, I am not too sure. And the gold, which is at 3%, if I'm not mistaken, if I take it to 12%, you will see even I will go maybe to the market, or you will go to the market and say that I want to pay in cash. So that is how the present situation in the country is. I think we will need some time. At this point of time, we should take some baby steps to reach to that optimal solution and not try to reach that optimal solution straight away. Sometimes we have a desire to go from 0 to 100 straight away, and we are not happy to go to 60. I would say let's try 0, 10, 20, 40, and then reach the optimal level that we want to reach. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments on this from anyone? Or? Yeah. Yeah.
Dr. Kelkar mentioned about how do we fund local governments? Is there a good way to do it? If you look at like in many Western countries, local governments do have, for example, in the current structure, the GST that you have, they could piggyback on the existing GST. So the local government could add 1 or 2 percentage points to the current GST and use that money for their local, for funding local goods. So if you look at the way our local bodies are funded, you find that relatively they're very underfunded. They depend a lot on state governments to send money to them. And that turns out to be quite a weakness for funding of local public goods. Even the amount of property tax they collect is not as much as we should. I think ideally we should collect a lot more property tax than we do. So if you give them more tax bases at the local government, property tax, and if you allow them to take a piggyback on the GST, some countries even allow an income tax at the local level. So of course, we don't even have income tax at the state level, but there are countries that even have income tax at the local level. So the same structure, you allow an extra rate to be imposed on the current system. So you don't create new rates, a new tax. It's an existing tax, but allow yourself to piggyback on that. And I know what Kavita mentioned, is the social security contributions a tax or not? No, it's kind of a tax if you do have some top up into a very low, for example, if you are paying into your social security all through your life, but at the end, the amount that you're coming out is below what you would say living wage, living expenses, then there could be some top up on that. So in that sense, it's a guaranteed income for people when they retire. And the second point is we do have a provident fund schemes, but that's largely in the formal sector. We need to have a structure that works for almost everybody in the country. Everybody in the country, when they grow old, they should have the security that they will be able to have some money that they can survive on, right? And so that's the idea as to how do we create a tax structure that can support that kind of thing, where when you grow old, you are sure that at least you'll be getting a 10,000 or 5,000 rupees. In fact, in Kerala, they have like a 10,000 rupee. There's a party that was formed on just on this issue, saying that everybody should get 10,000 rupees a month. Everybody in the country, at the very least, because that will guarantee that they can have a decent standard of living, and they form a party around it. But Kerala has a number of parties, so this is just an example. But in the future, this is going to be a demand that they could share. Everybody should have a basic minimum amount to survive. How do we fund it? And this was one of the suggestions I had, because most countries do have a social security contributions. So that's something to think about. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rajiv, I'm speaking a lot, but Dr. Kelkar wants to.
Yeah, Rajiv, can I?
Yeah.
No, I just want to mention that beauty of third tier sharing GST is extremely incentive compatible. In other words, it will improve both supply and demand for better governance. Because now every citizen of that place becomes a stakeholder. He sees that he's paying the taxes, he'll demand for better governance. The flip side is that the city authorities, larger tax base, they're better off. So we find tremendous incentive compatibility of this tax, but both supply side and demand side of governance. So I think there is some merit in considering this proposal.
Dr. Kelkar, I just want to respond to this thing of yours where you're saying that there should be a sharing between the center, state, and the local bodies. I would say that the pie is the same. If you look at the last Finance Commission, also the Finance Commission has given a lot of local body grants to the local bodies straight from the center itself. The money is going straight to the local bodies rather than going through the states. So as soon as you bring in something like that, we would soon notice that that particular tap would immediately close down. So whether this will be an addition to that or it will not be an addition to that is a major point to be noted, because generally what happens is that once they have a separate tap, the already taps which are running would get stopped. The second thing which I think the Finance Commission has done, and in a small way it has started happening, is that they have now said that this money will go to the local bodies depending on the reforms that they do. So one of the reforms on the property taxes is that the property taxes have to now go up at the same rate at which the CPI, if I'm not, GSDP growth, sorry. It is the GSDP growth rate that it has to. So this is a big step, I would say, in terms of reform. So if the local bodies want that money, they should increase the property taxes and collect those property taxes.
And better compliance and property.
Yeah. So that is another factor that needs to be taken. But I think it's a very complicated issue. And like the states keep accusing the center that they levy cess and don't share it with us. If you ask the local bodies, they have much lesser voice. They say the same thing about the states. So I think your point is valid, but we have to find an optimal solution, because the tax revenues, we can take it as the same kitty. So we have to distribute from the same kitty to these three organizations. And how do we do it? And what is the best way to do it?
Thank you. We need to now close in 5 minutes. So I would request for closing comments. I just wanted to summarize the session. One of the exam questions we had was, is India's tax GDP ratio right? The percentage is right. To achieve India's potential, the government certainly needs more revenues. Are there avenues without impacting economy and business through which more revenues can be collected? And at least what I heard was, I think the biggest silver bullet that India has is to enhance compliance so that everyone who's supposed to pay tax is actually paying their tax. I just wanted to address one issue. If we could get just 1 minute to 2 minutes response from each of you. We didn't, most people agreed that we probably don't need additional taxes or super rich tax, wealth tax, estate duty at this stage. But is there any base erosion that we should be looking at, whether it is in terms of incentives, whether it's in terms of some parts of income, agricultural income, some parts of taxation in the way they are taxed, capital gains tax or anything, where we can enhance the revenue base of the country. So I'll just, maybe Alex from that side, if we can start and get your feedback. I know this is a more local issue, it's less global issue, but any comments would be very useful.
Yes, of course. I mean, you say it's a local issue, but actually many of these issues, they are quite similar across the world. And a topic that is very common across the world is the under-taxation of capital gains compared to other types of capital income, which has the consequence that people prefer to collect capital gains. Yeah, you can look at the US, the super rich, they have a disproportionate share of their income in terms of capital gains, which is not taxed until realized, so they don't realize it for a long time and so on. So these are common issues. And if you allow me, I mean, the other point I wanted to make is that really we're talking about the level of taxation, but we should never forget the importance of the quality of taxation, right? We can raise revenues through many bad ways, not just nuisance taxes, but also good taxes that are badly implemented. VAT, we discussed already the multiple rate structure, so I'm not going to repeat that. But there is the other way to raise more money from VAT, which is not to pay refunds. Again, a very common thing around the world. It does raise revenues, but in a very harmful and bad way. And that's not the way to go. I could give you more examples, but probably I should not. Maybe I should just very quickly talk about the wealth tax because you mentioned it before. I think what many people think is a wealth tax that must be progressive because it's a tax on wealth and the wealthy have lots of wealth. But actually, if you compare a wealth tax to a tax on capital income, actually the wealth tax is regressive because the wealth tax is assuming that there is some constant rate of return on wealth, but it's not. So people who are very good at investing their wealth and make very, very high return, they actually like wealth taxes because it's a fixed percentage of their wealth. While if they had to pay capital income tax on their true capital income, they would pay much more tax. And on that, I think I have overused my minutes. So thanks a lot and let me stop.
We did do some work a long time ago on whether agriculture should be brought under tax. And I think the contentious issue is not so much whether there are too many poor people and therefore we should not bring in agriculture, but the fact that most poor people will not be liable to tax and therefore we should bring it in. The challenge is it lies in the domain of the states. So if the states and the center can come to a grand bargain a la GST, that I think is an interesting space to explore in the times to come, especially if we want agriculture also to become more, get more investment and move forward. I think that will be one space I would look to.
I'll take much less time. I agree both with Alex and Dr. Rao on this front. So on the agriculture also, I think it's a good thought because it also leads to a lot of evasion of tax through that means. So basically, I don't know, the way I have understood taxes that if I make money, I should pay taxes. And if I make more money than the threshold, I should pay my taxes. So whether I make it through capital gains, I make it through business income, salaried income, or anything else.
Yeah, two things. One is I was very, very interested that we should tax agricultural income. This is definitely I feel a hole in our tax policy because why are other incomes taxed but not agriculture income? But after I did the calculation, I'm not convinced because the tax from agriculture is very, very low because it's a highly risky investment. You notice, do farmers in their, very highly volatile, especially after climate change. You have droughts, you have floods. The actual income you get out of them is really limited, right? So if you allow truly carry forward of losses for agriculture, believe me, you'll get very little revenue. That's the calculation I did. A second calculation I did was on the billionaire tax. So if you go to Forbes.com, you can download the wealth of all the billionaires. I applied a 2% tax on that, and we're getting 1% or 2%, more than 1% of GDP of revenue by applying a 2% tax rate on the wealth of billionaires. So I'm sure they can afford it. And I'm very sure it will improve our direct tax to GDP, direct tax to our total tax ratio. And I think we should seriously consider it. I'll stop there.
Dr. Kelkar, we started with.
Yeah, Rajiv, I have to make a one point.
Your voice is not clear.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now it's better.
Yeah. No, one point not mentioned so far, so I'll just flag it. I think we have to also start thinking of eco taxes, essentially for the better environment. There are lots of negative outputs have been created, and we don't have adequate regime yet for eco taxes. So while I start thinking about it, how should be done, what level it should be exercised. But it's a very interesting issue, and I think sooner we start thinking about it, we are probably better off. On agriculture income tax, I think only way it may succeed, as Kavita said, if central government works as an agent of the states. In other words, collected money will go back to the state government, not at the central city. Then we may find state government may be forthcoming, that central government becomes the agent, because it has the data, it has and whatever the income tax collected on agriculture is at a certain level goes back direct 100% to the state collection. Then we may find some traction in this. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank all my fellow panelists for a very interesting session, and thank you everybody. We'll close now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So you have a question? Huh.
Thank you, Mr. Bajaj. You raised the issue of textiles. I've taken it up with you. I'm Kapoor from the Association of Synthetic Fiber Industry. There's a skewed GST structure in the case of, to the detriment of the man-made fiber industry. We pay 5% the textiles at the fabric stage, whereas it is 12%. You almost levied equal at 10%, but still you said probably political, whatever issue it is. But will it be carried on to the perpetuity? Because this man-made fiber industry is suffering. Our capacity utilization is just 65%. Globally, 110 million tons of textile fiber was used last year, out of which cotton has been 25 million tons. It can go to 24, 26, 27, but not more than that. And the balance comes from so-called man-made fibers. They're synthetic fibers, actually, and 90% of which is polyester. If this policy continues, I don't think we'll have man-made fibers in this country. Where will the clothing come from? Probably we go back to Adam and Eve days. So I think this should be resolved at the earliest.
I couldn't agree more with you. And I would say CII is sitting here. CII should take it up. I think that time I felt, I have said this in another forum, I felt very alone there. I felt very isolated there, that nobody was speaking out. The problem today is, which is very true, CII also represents various interests. So I'm sorry, I'm taking the name of CII. It's true for all bodies. So it's very difficult. So it's our job to do it. We tried our best. But I hope, Mr. Kapoor, that inshallah, it should happen. It will happen. We have, in fact, in the last two GST council meetings, we have reversed the inverted duty on a lot of items. So I think there's hope for textile. Textile is a big industry for us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
My sincere thanks to our esteemed panel of experts for their valuable time and sharing their enriching views, and Mr. Memani for bringing out a highly engaging and fruitful discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, our next session on technology and Atmanirbhar India will commence at 5:30 p.m. in Regal Room on the first floor. This session will be an in-person session during which we will have Mr. Uday Kotak, Chairman, CII Global Economic Policy Summit, and past President, CII and Managing Director and CEO, Kotak Mahindra Bank, in conversation with Shri Ashwini Vaishnav, Minister for Railways, Communications, Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India, who's again joining us in person. Ladies and gentlemen, request you all to kindly proceed towards the regal room on the first floor for the session, please. Thank you so very much.